managing director at the Groundswell Project. And his talk, Power to the People, Bitcoin in the Fight for Economic Justice. So please give him a warm welcome. Ghaffar, welcome to the stage.
Hello, everyone. So, my speech, Power to the People, name of a John Lennon song, but I'm going to make this relevant to Bitcoin and things we've already talked about. So I want to build on, obviously, what Femi and Abu Bakr have both talked about in terms of Bitcoin being a tool to empower people and to address some of the economic injustices we see today. Now, like with all good things, I want to start with the Roman Empire, and that's because apparently men think about the Roman Empire every single day. And Bitcoin is very male-centric, so I thought this would be relevant to all of us. So, and the reason I'm talking about this, I want to address something called late-stage fiat, as in what happens to a society which goes down the fiat route over time. Now, we have historical precedents for this, and this is why I want to talk about the Roman Empire. So, under the reign of Nero, Nero was an interesting chap because he inherited a lot of expensive public infrastructure projects from his predecessor, Emperor Claudius. But when he came into power, the Roman Empire was trying to invade Britain, which is obviously very expensive. They just had a great fire of Rome, so a lot of rebuilding wasn't needed as well, and agriculture wasn't doing too well. So what Nero decided to do was debase their silver currency, the denarii. And I think it went from 97% silver to 93% silver under his reign. So he began a process of debasement, which continued for the next sort of 200-300 years. Eventually, it got to a point where no one wanted the silver coin. People started bartering instead. People started hoarding precious metals at home. People started developing localized economies, and essentially people lost trust in the system. And for that and many other reasons, the Roman Empire collapsed, as we all know. Now you contrast that with the Byzantine Empire, whose solidness remained pretty solid in terms of the gold content of the coin. And that empire lasted another 1,000 years, all the way until Constantinople was sieged and taken over by the Ottomans. These are two interesting cases of how debasement can affect an entire civilization. So this is known about. This isn't new knowledge. This is known about historically, what happens when you debase. So much so that Dante's Inferno talks about this. So those who are familiar, Dante's Inferno is a book about hell, essentially. There's 10 circles of hell within this book. And the 8th circle, Dante encounters a debate between Master Adam, who is a fictional coin debaser, and Sinon, the man who was behind the Trojan horse fiasco. And these two are debating with each other. And essentially, Sinon says to Master Adam, I committed one crime, but you commit thousands of crimes, meaning every single coin that is debased is a crime in itself. So he's essentially comparing and contrasting what he did, i.e. the Trojan horse affair, with the currency debaser. Now, Dante, as you know, lived in Florence. Florence was, at the time, center of, at least the European economy. It was a center of financial innovation. And the florin, the coin of Florence, was a pure gold coin. People had a lot of trust in that coin. And the stability of Florence as a financial center was built in the trust people had in the local money. Right? And that's very important. And Dante understood this. And he understood that if we start debasing this coin, it'll undermine the entire society that they'd built in Florence. Of course, Florence did decline afterwards. It wasn't necessarily because of debasement. It was because obviously the trade routes shifted when the Portuguese discovered the New Worlds. Also, the Spanish and the Portuguese flooded Europe with silver and gold from the New Worlds, affected the price of metals as well. That's another important thing to remember about precious metals. You know, there's supply does go up about 2% a year as well, so it's not entirely the best source of value. So, late-stage fiat. What is late-stage fiat? Late-stage fiat is when the money printing has got a bit out of control. People start to lose trust in society. People's purchasing power is eroded. Private debt surges. You get asset bubbles. So, for example, after COVID, the S&P went up 40% within 1 year. Property in the US went up 20% 1 year after COVID. So the beneficiaries of the fiscal stimulus or the quantitative easing, whatever fancy term you want to use, were the very wealthy. And essentially it's a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. And obviously we all know about central banks. So the key point here is trust. And I'll keep coming back to this point of trust. Because when people stop trusting the system, when they stop trusting the currency, when they stop trusting the central bank, they essentially lose trust in each other. You lose trust in all public institutions, whether it's hospitals, schools. So this really does affect the social fabric of society in ways people don't quite understand. And we need to make more awareness. But what I really want to focus on in this presentation is the impact this has. Oh, I've missed a slide there. That's strange. Sorry. A slide has gone missing. That's interesting. Okay. What I want to focus on is the impact this has on the global south. So it's obvious to say that money printing in the West affects currencies in Africa. Many currencies in Africa are pegged to the dollar or pegged to the euro. So you've got the CFA franc, for example. So 14 African currencies are pegged to the euro. And the central reserves of those currencies are held by France. So essentially, it's a kind of economic imperialism that's kind of ongoing. So this is important to remember. So money printing is not, if it happens in the euro or the dollar, it affects people in other parts of the world as well. Now, there's some use cases, I think, where Bitcoin can solve this problem. Now, at Groundswell, we're looking at 4 main use cases where we believe Bitcoin can address some of the challenges posed by late-stage fiat in the global south. The first one is on remittances. So a Western Union transfer can typically cost 10 to 12%, sometimes more with certain transfer networks. People in places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa are very reliant on remittances. It's a main source of income for many people, and especially in South Asia. Now, there's a lot of gangsterism as well. So I was talking to someone from Sri Lanka who told me that you get gangsters with guns standing outside Western Union kiosks. And if someone goes to, or a woman goes to collect money from her son, they put a gun to her head and say, I want half of that. So it's not even safe because of the physical infrastructure required. So Bitcoin obviously can solve this in obvious ways, boosting how much money people can keep and get in their pockets, and takes away some of the dangers posed with having to go to physical kiosks to get the transfer. And obviously the rates via Lightning is a hell of a lot cheaper. So that's one obvious use case we're looking at. The other is female empowerment. Now, in many cultures around the world, women simply don't have. There are 1.5 billion people are unbanked globally, right? A lot of those are women, especially in places like Kenya. We're doing a lot of work in Kenya at the minute, where what happens in Kenya is most parents don't register their daughters for birth certificates. So they simply don't have birth certificates. If you don't have a birth certificate, you can't get a bank account. If you don't have a bank account, it's hard to set up a business. It's hard to run in local politics. It's hard to basically engage in society in a meaningful way. So essentially women who don't have birth certificates are unable to participate financially. And then you've got the cultural issues as well around husbands wanting to, or fathers wanting to control the financial autonomy of women. So again, Bitcoin in obvious ways solves this issue as well, gets rid of the need for ID, accessibility via Wi-Fi and a digital wallet. So we see Bitcoin as a form of female empowerment as well. Direct giving. Now, typically, if you give to a charity, up to about 25% of that giving will get covered, will get taken up with admin fees and other things as well. That the charities, I'm not against charities, but they absorb a lot of those costs to run the operation. And that's before you get into bank transfer costs and other costs that are involved in that as well. So again, Bitcoin is a use case for direct giving, where people in other parts of the world, in the global south, can create a project, like building a well, for example, stick a QR code online, and people can give directly to that project. So essentially, you emancipate people from having to rely on charities. And also charities in certain parts of the world are heavily politicized, as Femi talked about as well. Some of the charities are dependent on the political whims, let's just say, of the local leaders, and the local leaders will decide how the charity is spent. There's a lot of corruption in that sector as well. So Bitcoin gets rid of a lot of the corruption in the charity sector, which is quite widespread in many parts of the world. The final use case we're looking at is microfinance. So microfinance is very interesting for me personally. So it's something I looked into. So after the War of Independence in 1971, Bangladesh, which previously was East Pakistan, became obviously Bangladesh, but the country was very dependent on West Pakistan, which is current-day Pakistan, for grain imports and for basic food supplies like rice. So Bangladesh became a very, very poor country. I think 1 million people starved to death in Bangladesh in the late 70s and early 80s. That's how poor Bangladesh became. So Bangladesh became a bit of a testing ground for innovative financial ideas. One of the ones that actually worked was something called microfinance that was pioneered by a man called Muhammad Yunus, who's currently the interim leader of Bangladesh after the coup that took place last year. Now, microfinance is a very simple concept. Essentially, you create a circle of people, maybe 4 or 5 people that typically know each other. They all get a small loan, but the condition is that they all are liable for each other's loan. So if one person takes the money, runs off, or spends it on something crazy, the rest have to pay that back. If they pay back, they then get a bigger loan, sorry. So typically what would happen is you create these small communities, microcredit. They would invest it in farming infrastructure, in things that will allow them to make a living for themselves. And typically it would be family and friends, people that knew each other very closely, so the repayment rate was very, very high. And this is how you could stimulate local economies without having to go through, complex banking, getting loans from banks, which is much more complex in rural countries that don't have that same infrastructure. Now, we're looking to do this with Bitcoin, where we can use smart contract technology to create microloans with Bitcoin. And we're already gathering people in northern Kenya who run very small-scale businesses. And the idea is to kind of stimulate and encourage that entrepreneurship, mainly women, to be honest with you. Women in northern Kenya we're looking to do this with. But this is another great use of Bitcoin as a form of lending, where you can build into the smart contract certain things that have to be uploaded and certain things you have to commit to before the money's released and before the next money's released as well. So you can program the smart contract to release it at certain times in certain ways. So we think there's interesting use cases for Bitcoin in the global south. These are things that we are exploring. I believe late-stage fiat system is on its very last legs. I don't think it has much longer, to be honest with you, with the money printing happening now in America. And Bitcoin has a solution, especially in the global south, will take more and more precedent. So you can support our work. You can support the campaign. We are funded by the HRF fund that Femi talked about earlier. So thank you very much, Femi, for that support. But you can support us. My colleague and Hadia and I are around for the rest of the day. Come talk to us, talk about our work, support the work we're doing if you can, and spread the word. Thank you for listening.
And really quick, before we move on, if you do have any questions, let me know. But I also have, we have a few extra minutes in between, and I can also